Hey guys, welcome back. Well, this is kind of a if life gives you lemons, ask for more kind of video. I was recently finishing up an imaging project on a couple of DSO targets, and when the last target set, I still had some time before full-on light, so I slewed up to the moon and took some images and did some image processing in PixInsight using just their tools, and I thought I'd share my experience with you. I found that they were pretty useful. So this is the state of affairs when I went over to look at the moon. It's about 5:30 in the morning after the last target set on the horizon. I included as part of my imaging sequence script in Nina to slew up to this star here and do some autofocus runs with the red, green, and blue filter, and then after it finished that, it would slew over to the moon. Now, the autofocus runs actually turned out to be very consistent, as one might expect, since these filters are all manufactured by ZWO, and I found that the green and the blue were essentially identical, and the red was just a little bit different. So at the time, I noted down these figures, one value here for the green and blue and one value for the red, and used those when I changed filters. And then after I got the autofocus runs, I just had the scope slew over to the moon and wait for me to get up to take control over the session. One of the things that I like about the Nina sequencer is that you can stop it at any time, and it doesn't just automatically jump to the end of sequence tasks of warming the camera and parking the scope. So you can interrupt the sequencer at any time and it'll just stop there. It doesn't proceed forward. And that's what I did here. The script was set up to slew to the moon and then just go into a wait mode. And then if I didn't show up in 45 minutes or so, then it would just go on and park the scope and warm the camera and wait for me. But I did set an alarm. I did actually get up. And so I took control of the imaging session at this point and collected data just manually, just finding an exposure time that seemed to work, although I did overexpose a bit, and then just manually snap some pictures, about 50 on each filter. Let's go take a look at the data. In the blink utility, all the data I have is over here. You can see I settled on a 0.01 second exposure. I took the gain down to 10, whereas I normally for broadband filters shoot at 50. Camera is still cooled down to what it normally is, and we'll scroll through the green, the blue, the green, and the red filters. And as I say, there's about 50 pictures of each here, and we'll just let it run in a loop. And you can see that the images are all pretty good. These pictures are not being shown in the order that they were taken, hence there's kind of this jump. So there's a little bit of drift. Obviously I'm not guiding here, it's just sitting here pointing at the moon in tracking mode. Let's zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit of the surface. So you can see there's a little bit of waviness here, as the seeing is not perfect, but it is pretty darn good for this area. So I'm just going to pick more or less at random a picture to serve as my reference image when I align or register these images here. Anyway, this gives you an idea of what some of the data look like. If you get down into more of the detailed area, there's still some pretty good detail here of the moon. Okay, so let's collapse this down and we'll move that out of the way. The tool that we want to use after naming our reference image is in the script area under utilities, and it's FFTRegistration. FFT refers to the fast Fourier transform. It's a way of converting an image into sine waves, and the higher frequency or the closer the peaks are in a sine wave in a given image is an indication that there is more sharpness in the image, and it creates a pattern that can be used in 2D space to align surface objects. Star alignment is more useful when there are actual stars, but when you don't have stars, the FFT registration process is actually pretty good. So we'll use this tool. We'll load in our reference image, and as I say, I just picked this thing more or less at random. Down here in these options, the one that is checked is integrate registered images. So it will take whatever images you put in here, and then it will integrate them into a single image. I've got a mono camera. I've taken pictures in red, green, and blue. That means if I use this option here with this ticked, I should only load in the green images, for example, and then run it, and then get an integrated single image for the green filter, then clear it and run it with the blue and then clear it and run it with the red in order to get 3 different integrated registered images. I don't have to use this option. I could instead use this option, in which case it's going to write all the registered images out, and then we could come over and use the standard image integration script to combine those images. So those are the 2 options that you need to select. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to just select this one and untick that one. And then there are a couple of other options here. Correct for rotation. Well, this is taking over such a short period of time, there is no rotation. If you were recording data over a longer period of time and or had an altitude azimuth mount, then you'd probably want to click for correct for rotation. There is enable large translations, which I also don't have to deal with. If you were, again, looking at an object for a long period of time and it was drifting across the screen and there were significant translations, then you might want to click that. I'm not going to do any of that. The only thing I'm going to click here is the integrate registered images, which means now I need to go in and select all the files, say for one color, and we'll start with the blue since they came up first, and I'll do that and just run it, and it will produce in the end a registered image for the blue filter. Now this is going to take a little while as it goes through its thing, so I'm going to pause it here and we'll just wait for it to come up with a final image. Okay, so we're done with the image for the blue filter, and as you can see we have a stacked image here. One of the nice things that this thing does, if you just go in and pick out a random image and don't rename it or copy and rename the file as a reference, as I did here, you can still recover what that reference file was that you picked because it's listed up here in the title bar and over here. But let's just zoom in and see if we see any evidence that this is a combined stack of many images. Actually, it looks pretty good considering seeing and focus and those kinds of things. If we had a poorly registered image, you would see shadows or ghosts of all of the images kind of playing around a given feature here, so you would not see one consistent feature. So this is an indication that it did a pretty good job of doing the registration and then the stacking. Now I'm going to go ahead and repeat what I just did with the green and the red filters, and we'll come back with a final set of stacked images for the red, green, and blue. I'll pause and we'll come back when it's done. Alright, so here are our final stacked images. We have red, we have green, and we have blue. And so now it's just a matter of combining these into a color image and then doing our typical image processing. Now you'll note that in the process of creating these stacked images, I never use any darks or flats for calibration. It's just throw the data in and see what we get. We have plenty of signal here, so there's no need to worry about digging around and trying to improve the low signal noise to ratio. We have tons of signal here. Okay, so let's just collapse these down and let's combine them into a color image. And we'll use the standard channel combination and load that up with the red, the green, and the blue, and execute. And it comes out a tad red. That's okay. So let's go ahead and bring up a preview in the background area. And then we'll use the color calibration script here. The target image is going to be our white reference. We will use structure detection, and I'll go ahead for the ground references to identify this preview that I just created, and we'll let it do its thing, and that looks about right. Alright, so now we have a stacked image, and now it's just a matter of bringing out the saturation of these colors and also improving the detail of the image. And I think in terms of the order, it probably doesn't matter, but I'm going to go ahead and start with improving the detail this time. And I'm going to recreate the preview that I had, and also maybe a localized preview where some of this detail exists. And we'll bring up the HDR multi-scale transform for this. Now you'll notice there's some areas in the color where I did in fact saturate, even though I was not aware of it at the time. I need to dial back on my 0.01 second exposure time because I got too much the green and the blue channels saturated, which is kind of giving me this greenish cyanish color in some areas, and you can see it here in some of these craters that I'm getting. So I'm going to have to watch out for that when I'm doing the increased saturation and maybe dial back on the color and the saturation for this particular area of the color spectrum. But I'm going to go ahead and zoom out and then play around with some of these wavelet scales here to figure out which one that I like best. I think there's a lot of fine detail out here in these craters, and we want to enhance that, and that would argue for a smaller number of layers. But there's also these larger features of the moon that we are also interested in, and that would argue for a larger wavelet scale. So let's just dial it back to 4, and we're in preview mode here, so we can just apply these and see what it does. Now that's not a very good effect. It mutes the contrast variation, so I don't care for that very much. Let's try wavelet scale 5. A little bit better. Wavelet scale 6. Looking a little better. It's pretty intense. It's not bad, but if you could dial that back a bit, it might be better. Let's look at it applied to a detail area. Yeah, it's okay, but it is a bit strong. Let's go back to the big picture and try wavelet number 7. Now we're getting into larger scale features on the moon's surface, which means that we'll tend to mute out, or certainly not improve, any of the small scale elements. But you can see this does a pretty good job of bringing out this structure of the lava flow area. And just for the heck of it, let's go up to 8. And now we're kind of getting into the detail area is kind of receding into the background, and we're not getting much in terms of the kind of the thing we're looking for with a moon picture, which is a nice detail around the craters. I think I like the 6 better, so I'm going to go back to 6, but I'm not going to apply it just as is, because it is a bit stark of a change, and I think I want to nullify that just a bit, and I'm going to create a mask using PixInsight. This will be the simplest PixInsight expression you've ever done. I'm going to type in 0.5. I just want to create an image at half intensity that will serve as a half intensity mask, and I'm going to create a new image. It's going to be a grayscale image, and now I want to execute it, and that creates this image. And now I'm just going to apply this as a mask, and you can see it kind of covers up at half intensity the image here. We don't need to see it, so I'm going to turn that off. And I'm just going to apply this to the moon and enhance wavelet layer 6, but only getting about half the benefit because we have a 50% mask covering the whole image. Alright, that looks pretty good. So that was before, and this is after. So that did a pretty good job of kind of bringing out the detail, but also not muting the surface too much. But now I think I do want to apply a curves transformation to this. I'll take off the mask. I'm going to bring up the curves transformation. Let's put a little contrast on this image. So I just want to highlight the difference between the light and dark without going too crazy. And let's do a before and after. So that does bring out the dark area a bit more, and I'll go ahead and accept that, and we'll kill that off. And now we need to bring out the color. The moon is a bit color challenged, so it's probably a good idea to bring up the color saturation tool and do some enhancement of what we see here. Now I think I'm going to go ahead and create a little preview around just the moon itself so that we can kind of zoom in on the effect here. And then over here I'm going to increase the range a bit because we're going to need to do a lot of color saturation. And I'll bring up the preview of our preview, and then we can see where we go from here. Now one of the things that I do want to do is nail down this area where, let's see if we can do that. See, that right there is the area we want to keep from enhancing. And so this deserves a point here, maybe a point here, a point here, and let's go ahead and raise this up for saturation purposes. And I'm going to create a little curve here that has a little dip in it around the color area that got saturated when I overexposed the picture. So I have something like this. So in essence, I'm creating a uniform color enhancement, except at this location here where I want to preferably bring that down. Now you can see how this, if you keep your eye on this zone here and this zone here, I'm trying to get rid of that overly saturated green-blue color by putting in this dip here and taking out that saturation. Otherwise, just enhance the saturation across the color band as we are. And you can see we have had a pretty good effect. You can see some reddish browns here, maybe a dark blue gray area here. So certainly if we do a before and after, we can see that we've had a pretty good effect on that. And I'm going to bring this dip down just a tad, and let's go ahead and apply this enhancement. Okay, so that's a pretty good change there. Let's try it again. Now, that's too much. Let's go back a step, and let's bring the level down significantly so we can work on this in steps. And let's try it again. Alright, so that's getting pretty good. I don't want to go too far like I did before. Getting some nice reds here, and all in all, I think that's pretty good. I'm de-emphasizing that blue-green that I had in those two craters. And what if I did one more time? Is that going to take things over the top? Yes. And now we can go back to our full image, get rid of the preview once again, and let's take a look at this image. I think it looks pretty good, considering how little time I spent on it and how little effort. It was just a target of opportunity because, hey, there it is. Let's go into full pixel-to-pixel, one-to-one mode here. Some decent detail. This is taken with the Explore Scientific ED102. There are some arguably too much red, but it still gives it a little interest without dominating. I think this area with this lava flow area is kind of interesting with the seas of the moon. We get some reddish browns and some blues, dark blue gray kind of color in here, and it looks like a large crater rim. Who knows, this might have been the large crater or meteor that hit the moon and caused liquefied this portion of the moon and created the sea in the first place. I think PixInsight has some great tools. This is the first time I've tried out their FFTRegistration tool. It works pretty well, and the HDR wavelets works well. I think you do sometimes have to dial back its effect because it can be kind of stark sometimes. So there you have it, guys. When time allows, go ahead and grab some shots of the moon and try out some of these image processing scripts that are in PixInsight. They're actually very effective and might actually be very good for planetary imaging. I'll have to go back and look at some of my planetary data. Try this FFTRegistration script out. The image processing effort is at a minimum here. There's no playing around with flats or darks or background extraction. There's plenty of signal with this particular target. And there's actually a pretty useful feature such as the Fourier transform script for aligning large surface image targets. It worked very well. I didn't see any issues with that, and it's pretty quick, so you could just have it do the registration and stack the images, or you can do the registration and do the processing yourself through image integration, or possibly even take those images and load them into some other software to do the actual selecting of the best quality images. I did all of this manually. I played around with the exposure settings to try to find the right one. I still ended up with the wrong exposure because I did overexpose some areas. So you probably, if you're doing this, you want to make it a little more dim to your eye than you're expecting the final image to be, because you can always brighten it up, but once you saturate the pixels, it's a done deal. It's probably best to acquire the data manually. Typically when I do a planetary imaging, I'm using my RGB small sensor camera, the ASI 120MC. In this case, I went ahead and used my ASI 1600, and rather than set it in video mode, I just clicked the button manually 50 times for each filter and about once a second. And so over a period of 3 minutes, I collected the data that we looked at here. We did all of this in PixInsight, which is cool, but there are some other very good software packages out there, all of them free. And the Planetary Image Preprocessor, or PIP, is a good one. AutoStackert is a good one. And of course, the old man in the room is Registax. It's still out there and available for download, so don't forget about those guys. All in all, compared with DSO image processing, this is an absolute breeze. In just a few minutes, you can whip through an image of the moon and get something that gives the moon a little different look than the very muted gray that we see. Okay, guys, that's all I have for today. Clear skies as usual, but first, something very important is going to happen tomorrow. And no, I don't mean that. I mean the JWST telescope launch. This is a replacement for the Hubble Space Telescope, and it's going out to a place in orbit at the L2 equilibrium point that is not going to be reachable for service. so it has to work when it gets out there. And I don't think people realize just how risky this mission is. It's set to launch tomorrow, December 25th, between 7 a.m. and almost 8 a.m. Christmas Day tomorrow morning, and I'll certainly be up looking. But a lot of things have to go right starting tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to have the launch, and the telescope is folded up to fit inside the fairing volume of the Ariane 5 rocket. It will then undergo a series of, NASA says, 300 single-point failure steps to get it to expand from this stored configuration in its launch bay to the final deployed configuration where it will start to actually be a telescope. If you take a look on the web, the Ariane reliability is about 95%, or has a reliability of 0.955. What does the reliability of each single point failure device have to be? All 300 plus single point failure devices have to work in addition to the launch before the telescope can deploy and start operating as a telescope. What if the reliability of each single point failure device was the same reliability as the launch vehicle at 95.5%? Then the probability that this telescope can get launched and successfully deployed is equal to 0.0001%. Yikes! What if the reliability of the single point failure devices has a 99% success rate? Then the probability of success only jumps to about 4.7%. What if the success rate of the single point failure devices is 99.9%? Finally, the probability of successful deployment gets up to about 71%, which is marginally acceptable, you would think. Hopefully, these single point failure devices have a much higher reliability. At the end of the day, this mission is going to require a lot of luck. Good luck to those engineers who designed the JWST. I'm pulling for you. Okay, that's all I've got for today. See you guys.